This is question 33 from section 1 of the 2016 TSA paper. And the question is, which option, if true, most weakens the above argument? So let's look at what the argument says. First, it says some public institutions, it gives the examples of the central bank and the constitutional court, are meant to be independent but are actually captive to political interests. So that might mean political parties or people in government, something like that. And it says the leading officials are appointed by the government and the appointments are always the result of political power games. Then it says it's fundamentally undemocratic to delegate too much power to people who haven't been elected. And last it says, therefore, in order to ensure the independence and democratic nature of the institutions, the public officials should be elected in general elections. Okay, so let's think about the structure of this argument, and then we can look at which option will most weaken it. Well, it looks like the writer is giving us a bunch of problems with the current status of political institutions and the people who run them. And there's a therefore at the end before the last sentence, and then they say officials should be elected instead. So it definitely looks like this is the conclusion, and then these problems are the reasons. In particular, this sentence saying officials are appointed by the government is actually support for the first sentence saying the institutions are controlled by political interests. So these sort of form a single reason, which is basically saying that the institutions aren't properly independent. And then the writer also says they're not properly democratic, and their conclusion is to make them independent and democratic, we should do something, which is have them be elected. So there's these two pieces of support for this one conclusion. And let's look at our options, and we're looking for something that undermines the conclusion as directly as possible. So here are my 5 options, and each of them I'm going to see if they're relevant to one of the reasons or directly to the conclusion, and I'll see if they strengthen, weaken, or are neutral towards that part of the argument. So first let's look at A. A says that once they're appointed, people in public office pursue strategies inconsistent with the goals of the people who appointed them. So they're going against the interests of the people who appointed them. So this isn't relevant to the democracy part of the argument, but it is relevant to the independence part of the argument. And it's saying that even though the officials are appointed by, for instance, the government, it looks like they're still independent because they're not following the interests of those people. So they're not controlled by political interests. So that means it's weakening this reason for the conclusion. So let's look at the other options and see if we can find something else. B says that people, when they're surveyed, aren't interested in electing public officials. So it might look like this is something that weakens the conclusion, because perhaps if people aren't interested in electing officials, that means we shouldn't do it. But that's too big a leap to make. Just because people aren't interested doesn't mean just because people aren't interested doesn't mean it's a bad idea to make the positions elected. It's not saying that, for instance, that people have voted against this course of action, it's just saying they don't express interest in it. So actually this is just neutral. It's not weakening the argument. C says a politician has vouched for the independence of a candidate, so they've said that the candidate for being head of the bank is independent. So again, you might think this weakens this reason, that it suggests that the candidate for head of the bank is independent, but A, that's only one candidate, and B, this is only saying that the politician has said they're independent, and we might have reason not to believe them, especially if there are political power games going on, as the writer argues. So I'm just going to mark this as neutral. It's not a very good reason to doubt the argument at all. D says that a former judge was recently jailed for electoral fraud. So that suggests that the judge was politically involved, and so it's actually strengthening this reason for the conclusion that people in public office aren't politically independent. If we look at E, that says that heads of central banks often have strong connections to political parties. That's actually strengthening exactly that same reason. So if they've got connections to parties, then they're probably not politically independent. So that means the only thing that weakens the argument at all is option A, even though it only weakens a reason. And that means that our answer here is A.